Right, so we started off, or rather we finished off, before the, you're going to be moving your camera a lot if you want to go and film me right now, before the break, with a little bit of a polemic. So the dynamics of programmatic change, whether it's mappable, not mappable, multi-mappable, etc., is it applicable to different paradigms of change? I like that word. Dorte taught me that word. So incremental reforming, is that the other one?
Incremental reform and transformation.
Yeah, so that's what I said. Incremental reform and transformational. So is it applicable? And that was yours. You're basically saying it's not.
I'm saying that.
So just sorry,
you want
before.
Me to say it's not. It's not.
No, yeah. Okay. So just before we start, I took an executive decision
Tell me to say it's not.
not to use a mic and go around and say, talk here and talk there, because I want the discussion to flow, which does mean that you will have to use your abdomen when you talk. Okay? You're going to have to project your voice a little bit. So I'm sorry, Steve, I interrupted. What do you think?
It's not. I could add something more.
Well, do.
Well, do. Okay. Well, thank you. I think it's true if you look at the various approaches to these types of change, that there are these stages. I would describe it as stages. If you look at Otto Scharmer's work, for example, he talks about the co-analysis, co-sensing, co-developing, which could be applied to that as well. But I'm very cautious about how I would, whether that is not too high of a level of generalization to actually be helpful, and that I would fear it would be misleading to people if they're applying the same model to transformational change or emergent change, I think you said, Mason? Yeah. As opposed to programmatic change, which I think is more about the reform kind of thing.
Can I actually looked at a few models that were classified as emergent change, and they fit the pattern.
I didn't say they didn't fit the pattern. I'm just saying that I think that it would be a dangerous simplification to say that this pattern is going to be useful to all those types of to both types of change. I think that it can be misleading. I automatically jump to all my experiences, which I related before, about a stakeholder going into the room from a business and saying, well, this I assume is going to be run like a business when it's a multi-stakeholder setting. Yes, they're both organizations. Yes, it's both change. But is it not a bit dangerous to bring in a certain mental model and then presume that everything else is going to follow?
Okay, Lars.
I think very few change processes are either programmatic or transformational. So I really think there will be elements of linear thinking, and where linear tools and processes are appropriate, and there will be other phases where you need code, all these code things you were mentioning, Steve. So, and that's just how it is now. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and therefore we need to integrate. But I'm struggling a little bit, Lisa, with the why do you call it programmatic? Maybe you.
Cecile, you're bouncing up and down on your chair.
I'd be happy to answer that, but Cecile's jumping up and down.
I fully agree with just what Lars was saying. And I personally hate the word programmatic, as well as the word linear.
Sorry about that.
Way. On the other hand, what I'm seeing in the work Lisa is doing is a tool that is helpful with customers.
Yes.
Because when people like us approach customer saying, you have a problem, you need us to help with change. If you arrive with just saying, I know about change, I've been educated through the CCC and so on, it's too much uncertainty for them.
Yeah.
us to say, okay, I can do that, or that. And maybe I have a tool that will help find out which kind of technique, concept, whatever we will use, okay?
Yeah.
And I think we don't have that today. And I will just finish. I was 2 days ago in the Association for Change Management Practitioner conference. And they are very programmatic. Nadia knows them. They work also with ProSci in the US. They are very programmatic. They have techniques. They have this kind of cards where it's really like you said, any kind of change is the same, and I pick a card, I have inspiration, I do the document, and I give that to the customer. And this is definitely not us. And this is definitely what Lisa is not doing, because her work is much more complex and systemic than this kind of change. So I feel it's useful.
I know, Lars, you want to rebuttal, but what's really interesting is the model is used as a platform for conversation. And one of the things that we say about the work that we do is we change the conversation in organizations. And whether you're working with companies that want to empower their young professional women, companies that are going through chaos of change, it is, as Cecile said, it's nice to go in and say, not this is the plan, but this is what we've seen. You know, I've been in practice for 30 years, and this is what we see in change, and you'll see some of those patterns. Now, I agree, we'll never be able to say in every situation we're going to use exactly the same thing. But how many of you have gone into when there was a time, I think in the, I want to say 80s, where the burning platform, like everything was about the burning platform. Was it the 80s or the 90s? And how many of you went into an organization and you couldn't find the burning platform? And it's like, what am I going to do if there's no burning platform? Well, you look at a strategy or a vision, right? You look at a problem and start there. And we've used this model in a joint venture with 8 partners. And it allows people to come together and say, okay, I don't like this about your model, but it's a jumping off point for a discussion, right? It's a jumping off point to say, no, we've got a lot of emerging issues here where, there's so much difference in culture or whatever, and it's like, okay, then we diverge, right? We take a look at what's emerging. But it's just, it's a comforting thing for a lot of organizations to have a piece of paper at everyone's desk that says, I'm going to be consulted on this big thing that's going to happen to me. And I think that sometimes we forget that in all these huge change programs, they're individuals. And they're worried about what's going to happen to them.
Lars.
I very much agree, Cecile, and I think we should avoid speaking negatively about what we today call programmatic change and linearity, because I don't think it is. I think and we change processes are not always, emergent, blah blah blah. So that's one. And then I think if we walk into a room in one of our first meetings with a client or whatever, and we say, now we're going to sit together, we will be co-creating, we will be touchy-feely, and we don't know the answers, and you will get thrown out as a consultant immediately. So people need not to feel, of course, a sense of urgency that here is something important going on, but they also need to be motivated to actually go and do the work. And I think talking, for this example with the municipality again, right now we're in a phase of analyzing and finding facts and so on. And that makes sense. And then we can actually live in the question for a little while longer until we know what's going to happen. Anyway,
What do you think about that, Dorota? Because, Lars has just said you can't be touchy-feely and stuff, and you have to go and... Oh, sorry, yeah. Wasn't that? Ha ha, let's have a laugh. you know, so you can't go in there to managers and leaders and say, well, you know, we want to understand who you are. From your presentation, I kind of got the opposite view. You don't go in there saying, here's a program, this is what I'm going to do. You're about helping them to understand how to be different leaders. So what's your position on this particular part of the discussion?
Well, I think part of the reason why I get to do that type of work is that maybe my work comes with another title. It's like, okay, so we want to do some training for some of our leaders, but it's not going to be a traditional training program. And could you please come and do something with us that has a training element, but it's more practically oriented? That's mostly the kind of invitations I get. And once you have that kind of invitation and you have some, you get some safety and comfort in the fact that also we have these sessions and then something is taking place between the sessions, but people can see that there's a kind of structure. Then I think there's enough safety in the room to kind of let go a little bit of the control. And often I try to, in my work, I switch between team sessions and individual conversations. And often what I find is that once you have people one-on-one, they are able to express their own anxiety and their own frustration in another manner. And then when you get back to the team again, and they've kind of expressed that individually, sometimes you can get this anxiety and uncertainty in the room. And I guess that's very important because I think generally a lot of managers waste a lot of energy trying to pretend that they're in control.
Yes, Berit.
I very much agree with we have to be careful not to label it either as one or the other. And it struck me there's a little framework that I often use. It's Matrix, of course, or a 2x2. Maybe I should just draw it. Some of you probably know it.
Sure.
It was Stacy originally, or somebody made it out of Stacy's work. But it's so there are two dimensions. One is agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one is certainty. And here you have near to agreement and far from agreement. And here you have near to certainty and far from certainty. And so when I'm in a group discussing with people and you sometimes feel all this, whoa, you haven't got the answers. Sometimes it can just be really helpful to draw this up and find out, is this something where we are certain about we know the solution or not? And you sort of get a discussion around that and we find out how much do we agree about this or do we not agree? And so if you are down here, it's easy to use what we can call programmatic, known methods and stuff. But if you're out here, this is where the need for co-creation, because you are not certain about what the problem is, so you have to find out. And you are not in agreement what it's all about and how should we do that. So you have to.
Yeah, but that's a totally different thing. You're doing an analysis of the situation. She's talking about something that's supposed to apply to any situation. So
Yeah, but you can use this as a sense-making model for.
Well, I say I would use it too, but
when do we actually use the toolbox that we have, and when do we co-create? So it was just trying to be.
Okay, first Dorothy, then Monica.
Well, I would actually like to defend Lisa's position from a complexity point of view. Because I don't know how many of you remember the session we had with Meg Wheatley in Paris. And the way she was talking a lot about the natural order that exists within the chaos. I mean, that in every kind of system there is a natural order. So I mean, what makes me curious about what your work, the work you're doing, Lisa, is that perhaps I think you've succeeded in identifying part of the natural order of change. And that it goes through these kind of phases, and I think in very different scales, and in very different rhythms. And sometimes I think there are a lot of iterations around one phase, another time it's more smooth sailing. But I think, I mean, that's the thought I'm getting, is that I think you've uncovered part of the natural order of change. And I think I'll work with this kind of as a hypothesis in some of my future work and finding out if I can recognize this.
Right, Monica, and then Elizabeth.
Maybe I haven't understood your model fully, Lisa. Is your model around how do I implement, or is it how do I detect what is really my topic? Is it a more rigid problem, or is it a more straight topic where I really can do law and order and just say this is how we do it? Where do you start?
The model is for dealing with change, but the first part of it is analysis. And what I'm positing is that even with complex or chaotic change, you can see a pattern emerge. And by displaying that pattern for the people that are in that chaos or suffering from that complexity, it lowers their stress. So even, you know, we look at agreement and certainty and say, well, the further out it is, the more co-creation we have to do. But co-creation has a structure, right? Co-creation has a pattern. Dealing with emerging change, like we'll go through the programmatic change model, and we'll get, you know, to the testing of a concept. Okay, we're going to change the culture. Let's do a bit of testing. And in that, we'll run into something that's very emergent that had not been considered at the beginning during the analysis. So then we have to go back and do analysis, design. We have to do that all inside the model. So it's like the model inside the model inside the model. But all I'm saying is, if you look at, like, even a problem you have in your personal life, the problem that you have never faced before, and you don't know how to deal with, the first thing you're going to do is see if you can figure it out. You're going to look at what other people did, and you're going to talk to other people.
Yeah, that's
right?
the start everywhere. And as long as we haven't figured it out, what we want to take care of, we cannot start to do something. And if we start to do something at that stage, then we will go off and we will blend over. But how we do it, because we all have same or similar cognitive experiences, and we have same or similar cognitive base on how we work.
Mm-hmm.
It is about figuring out what we want to do, and then try to implement it. And when we implement it, we have to first analyze it, and then we have to come up with a plan, and then we have to say, okay, which are our stakeholders, and how do we do it, and where do we do it? Otherwise, we will never get things done.
But how many of you have gone into a location because your client or a prospect called you and said, hey, we've got this problem and we hear you're good at solving it, can you come in and do it? You know, do your thing, solve our problem. And you get in there, and the first thing, I've got to think, the first thing everyone in this room does is an analysis. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, we'll say. Let's have a conversation. Let me come over, we'll talk for an hour. It's not going to cost you anything. We'll talk about what you think your problem is. We'll talk about how it might fit. We'll see if we like each other and if we can work together. I imagine that everyone in this room does that on some level, some way, right? And in that, you find out that the problem they're struggling with is not actually the problem. I know in the 90s, I had a client call me and say, oh, we need stress management. Can you come and do stress management? And I was like, yes, I can do stress management, but let's have a conversation. I went in, they were amalgamating 6 boards of education. They needed stress management, but the people had no vocabulary to be able to talk about what they were experiencing and the fear they had about losing their jobs. So we did, instead of going in and doing a 1-hour session on stress management, oh, breathe deeply, relax, we did a 6-week program that allowed people to really understand what was going on for them. And from that program, we did anger management because we found that so many people were so angry that things were being broken at work. People were having fist fights at Toronto Board of Education, right? It was a mess. But if I had just gone in and said, oh yeah, I can do stress management, no problem. And we've all had that. So what this model does is it allows you to say, okay, we always do an analysis. And let's figure out what the problem is. And let's not do any of this. You can see, we can do all of that. But let's stop here and consider.
First Elizabeth, and then Rachel, and then
yeah.
Mark.
What was going through my mind listening to this, and I apologise for not being here earlier, is that it is, as Monica said, it's all about the way we work. I don't think we help ourselves too much by talking as if change is something out there that can be sort of scientifically put into different boxes. There's that sort and there's that sort. It's all complex, extraordinary activity, complex activity of humans interacting in all sorts of ways. What we're talking about are the models that we have in our minds and impose on that to try and make sense of it, the way we work. So we come with different models and toolkits and whatever else to help ourselves and other people to make sense of something.
Yeah.
And that can be many different ways. I was thinking that and thinking, that makes sense to me, my thought. And then daughter said, yeah, but maybe Lisa is talking about something and has found some of the what did you say, the natural order of things. And that made me think, because I have been grappling for some time in trying to truly understand chaos theory and complexity. And I think maybe I don't understand that, and there is some real order there that isn't something to do with my sort of social constructivist approach here, saying it's all about the models in our mind. But I think I retreat to saying, I think it is all about the models in our mind and the way we work. It isn't about, there's that sort of change and that sort of change and that sort of change.
Okay, Rachel.
Yes, I mean, practically speaking, working in the market of organizational transformation, I'm finding that I'm coming in after or in parallel to the McKinseys, the Bains, the A.T. Kearneys and all that of this world. And I find this model really useful, not only to not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and be sort of ideological about the kind of positioning we have, but also consider what's useful in what they do in organizational design and BPR and all of that stuff, and how this can fit together. And I think it's a question of being clear about what one's sort of professional identity is and what is the value added that we bring with our kinds of lenses and practices, and relating it to what these guys do.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I mean, because we need to be able to work together. I can give you an example of one project I did. A.T. Kearney were doing business process re-engineering for after-sales service in a technical organisation. And I was doing an organisational sociology analysis of these guys, and they were all committing suicide. So on the one hand, A.T. Kearney was trying to squeeze 25% costs out of them, and we were highlighting all of the different elements of the context that were leading to suicides. And basically we just got thrown out. Because it's not in the interest of the organisation or of the dominant consulting party to take on board these kinds of this kind of feedback. And so I think we really need to be able to learn how to work these things together.
Okay, and Mark. Thank you.
Just from yesterday, I'm trying to be mindful as I listen to this. So I'm tapping into how I'm feeling. I'm feeling really reassured and slightly excited even, because a lot of this resonates with what I'll be talking about in my spread talk. Secondly, the quote by George Box is popping into my mind that all models are wrong, some are useful. So I really like multiple models, and I don't like being attached to any particular model. And so I think it doesn't really matter as long as we keep grabbing as many models and see what resonates with people we're in conversation with. And that can be a useful jumping off point for different types of conversation. So that's a comment. A question for Steve, actually, around coherence. So I'm really interested in our work in coherence in human systems, in communities at local level. Steve was talking about coherence and developing coherence in systems, and actually having coherence as the goal, not any other explicit goal. and looked at 7 functions within effective or successful systems. I think most of the functions might be more obvious or apparent to me, but system organizing is an interesting one. So I wondered if we could just have a bit more on what is system organizing? What does it involve? That would be helpful for me.
You're allowed.
Well, I'm going to respond to Lisa first. I wanted to fight. So there has to be some way that stakeholders connect with one another. I mean, it's obvious at a global level you can't have every organization trying to participate as an equal voice. So it's about how can we organize the system so that we can hear the diversity, but not have to deal with the aggregate, or not have to deal with the mess of the way it's organized, if you want to put it that way. So if you have 1,000 organizations, like Climate Action Network has organized the NGO voice to be a coherent voice because they come from a similar set of concerns. And so that's what I call a system organizing function.
So providing some new structure.
Well, sometimes it has to be new. Sometimes the coherence itself is simply bringing them into contact with others that have similar views that just are not connected. Now, can I talk about Lisa?
No. So, Dennis,
Take the
you
spotlight
had a-
off of Lisa.
yeah.
I think I like your model, but at the same time, I find some internal problems. So I like a lot of those models because what I'm trying to do is trying to combine, excuse me for the wrong words, the programmatic with the adaptive, etc. And there are parts of one program, and it's messy and all those things, but it's so messy that I can't sell it. It's so messy, the clients need a certain degree of control. And before, maybe before CCC and well before, I was quite happy because I kind of believed in it. I kind of say, here's sort of a model and this is what you do, and etc. And there's some structure, etc. to it. And there are more patterns. Now I'm actually thinking, now I might be seeing more patterns than there really are. And it is actually a little bit more messy. So quite often I'm trying to sell something. Quite often I'm sitting in front of a table and providing a framework to give that confidence to a client. But deep inside of me, I go like, this is a bit fake. It's not real. But I can't get to the complexity through. So I do know as well that I need a starting point with a client, and that's what you were talking about as well, and Lars is talking about, that maybe I'm giving a little bit fake control right at the beginning, and then while working with the group, people will understand that it is a little bit more messy than what I once provided. But there's a bit of a turmoil there.
Okay.
Can I build on that? Am I allowed?
Go on.
30 seconds.
Go on.
Actually, this model came out of my frustration with trying to work with Clotter's model or anybody, like, because they're so restricting.
Mm-hmm.
And this way, you get a choice. Again, it's like a menu, you know? So.
Okay, Rick. And then
I'm a great believer in building a process out of metaphors and stories. Here's a metaphor that we developed many years ago and has been really valuable. I wouldn't have known, before this conversation, I wouldn't have known to say this, but it's a metaphor that bridges structure and complexity. Lisa, you've been waiting for this. Don't worry, the tape is on. The metaphor is Brazilian football. Now, for fans of the world game football, you know that the Brazilians call it the beautiful game. Though they've had a few bad years, they have won the World Cup 5 times. They practice to samba. Compared to other teams, they are more fluid, more improvisational, shorter kicks. I'm not an expert on the game, but I'm told that the English go for the long, heroic kick. and then dash down the field and hope that they're there in time, and told that the Germans play a very efficient game. But the Brazilians, fluid, improvisational. I think what that does for learning, you're learning at every moment. You're in dialogue with your short kicks. You're in constant dialogue with the other players on the pitch. Your metrics are so simple. Are we playing our game? Yes or no. If we're not playing our game, then how do we adapt? How do we stay fluid in the moment? You could be out there in a fog with the vuvuzelas from South Africa blaring in your ears. But because you're so tight with each other, you can be completely exploring the pitch. We use that over and over and over on a regular basis in client projects. For instance, I was brought in by a group of marketers who worked with the engineers and architects of a transit authority. They were building a complex line, and these were the marketers who were telling the story to the community as the engineers and architects did their work. The marketers needed to check in with their internal clients, find out what they needed in the 2 or 3 years ahead. And so we planned and executed a half-day workshop to talk about the future. As you'll see this afternoon and tomorrow, it was a kitchen table, and it was lively, and it was rambunctious, and it was fruitful, and the affect in the room was terrific. And halfway through our allotted time, I checked in with the group, about 20 people in the room. I checked in with the group on a scale of 1 to 10, how are we doing? And the answer came back 5. So this was a first. The affect was terrific, and I got a 5. So what's the problem? Remember, I was in a room full of architects and mostly engineers. And so the answer was, I need a list. Of course they needed a list. And we interviewed every single person in the workshop, and we missed the fact that these are engineers. It's got to be practical. It's got to be completely tangible. As you said, that tactile community. So in an instant, I said, right, we're going to do a breakout. Gave them a topic, got them into breakouts of 2 or 3 people. And once the breakouts were at work, I grabbed my 3 clients, we left the room, and I said, folks, we have a problem. And they replied, oh, but this is exactly the workshop we wanted. This is great. I want it to be just the way it is. Folks, you are losing your client. It's Brazilian football time. Oh, you're right, okay. Lock back in, switch to a list, they were thrilled. It was a 10-second decision because everybody was steeped in the metaphor.
Thank you.
It's a good metaphor. The only thing is that the Brazilians should be replaced by Dutch total football.
Thank you for that.
I'm from Holland.
I don't think that what Lisa is producing is a model. It's a meta model. Am I right?
Yeah.
Because it's definitely not one model that fits everything. It's a model of models. And it's definitely what we're doing when we're having that first conversation with the customer. We have our own filters. Each of us have filters in his or her head saying, okay, this is the problem. Am I going to do some coaching or some consulting? Am I going to produce an analysis? Or am I going to do action learning or whatever? So we should not say programmatic model. We should not say linear or whatever. We should not say model. We should say meta model, I think. Just to avoid.
Write it down.
Yeah.
Good one.
Just to avoid going into that kind of a discussion. Why is your model good? Because I know other model. This is something. This is kind of an umbrella.
So you're giving us the opportunity to avoid discussion. Very good. Right. Next, Steve, it's your turn. Steve is so frustrated that I have not given him the floor. And he's now resorted to writing. It is now your turn.
So the arguments actually in favor of the model remind me of when I had a construction company, and we worked with a lot of residential house owners. And I quickly learned that residential house owners usually get a job that they want to have hire a construction company for, maybe once a decade, maybe once in their lifetime. They're very ignorant about things of cost and about time. The only way a contracting company is going to get that contract is by lying to them, right? About how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to be. Because everyone's lying because they're wanting to get the lowest bid. So the arguments I've heard in favor of it about, well, everyone's going to feel better then, we'll lower the tension in the room, we'll get the contracts, it's all tactics. So, fine, if that's the tactic, the only way I kept this company going was by lying, jumping in the lying, and saying that's fine. But I think that we can also look at trying to develop something that is more specific and not aggregated at such a high level that it actually can be deceptive. So I was trying to write here because I was trying to think about what might be useful. And I know you can't see it very well because of the pen. So I've reproduced this thing I did yesterday with incremental change, reform, transformation. So the point is, I have not seen an internal organizational project that has been transformative. Maybe they exist. All the transformative projects I've seen involving organizations have been inter-organizational. And that does not include mergers or acquisitions, because those are reform, right? You're changing, you're basically doing the same thing. You're not changing the core logic of the way the organization works. You're not changing the vision and the question of what is our purpose? What are we trying to do? That's transformation. So I would say that, you're pretty safe if you're working with a client in an organization to say, we're working with reform, we're working with incremental change, so go ahead, use the model. But if you're using it for transformation, I think it would be useful to do that type of analysis with the Stacey model, which I think is useful, and then say, if we're here, we're going to go from reform, and then we're going to have to do some incremental change after we figure out what to do. If we're here, we're going to have to go into experimentation, and then we're going to have to figure out how to scale and change. And it's a different direction. So I think that, you deal a lot more with clients than I do. I deal a lot more, my clients are usually multi-stakeholder, for one thing. So I'm dealing with it, you know your clients, so you have to do what you got to do with your clients. But I'm just saying that I think that we've got to be clear that the dynamics here, maybe we want to pretend with our clients for a little bit, but the dynamics here in transformation lead to experimentation, and that's the emergent path. It's not to reform. And reform does not lead to transformation, right? So that's my experience. Maybe, that model can be improved.
Thank you.
Rebuttal,
Thank you.
rebuttal. I'm not lying to my clients.
Pardon me?
I'm not lying to my clients. And I've seen transformational change where they tried to do exactly the same thing in the same way with another company, and it didn't work. Because they tried to do exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. And it never works because the landscape changes. What our model does, we have the experimentation, the testing, the iteration. What our model does is give you a choice to say, okay, this may be a transformational moment.
So I think
What
we're
are we
using the word
going to do?
transformation quite differently, Lisa. I'm using transformation when you're questioning the basic power structures, the basic question about having a board of directors, what the purpose of the corporation is, that degree of change. I'm not suggesting whether we should be in this business line or that business line. I think maybe we're using the word differently.
We can agree to disagree, but
Okay.
I agree with your definition of transformational
Okay.
change. And
Steve,
wider.
I'm sorry.
Great.
Go ahead.
Steve.
Yeah, I must admit, I was a little like Elizabeth when I was watching. I thought, when I look at clouds, sometimes I can see a camel. So it's the pattern I'm creating, essentially. And then, actually, I was thinking, you actually do what I do with a lot of my clients, which is, I think fundamentally the problem in change is not whether it's that program or that program. It's the lack of flexibility and adaptability that the models seem to bring in people. That if I do this thing, then this thing, then this thing, I'll get this result. And we train people in managing successful programs, and in Prince2 in the UK, and they go through those programs, and you have a project manager who's saying, I've got my plan, you need to do this by then, I can tick the box, we've got a successful program. And it's about how you operate more flexibly within that meta model, which I think it is, and adapt your individual environments to what it is you're trying to do, and recognise that you go back to the problem you think is the problem. Actually, as you get halfway through, maybe a very different problem, and you need to go back to it. So it's that, I think that adaptability and flexibility, and being able to pick what it is you need without thinking there are 8 steps in this process, and as long as I follow them, I will get a successful result, because life isn't like that at all. And I think that's really helpful, you know, whether it's a social construct or whatever it is, that there are a variety of tools and techniques. And I think it's back to what you were saying, Steve, is start with what is the problem, you know, and make sure you, I was in a Hong Kong coffee shop, and Pacific Coffee, if you ever go into Hong Kong, and they're one of these places where they have these phrases on, and it said, a problem well defined is a problem half solved.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a wonderful phrase. We so often, and I'm working with so many clients who they think they know what the problem is, and there's a phrase in Lean is that if the problem you think you have suggests the solution, it's not the problem. Because I once worked with Pizza Express, who came in and asked me to work with them, and said, our problem is our ovens aren't big enough. So I said, well, that's not your problem, that's the solution. So if the solution is in the problem definition, it's the wrong problem. And I think working more adaptably and flexibly is what you're suggesting, rather than getting hung up on it. When we talk about program, I think people see it's the Prince2 or the MSP program. If you follow these steps, and there's so many people who want that, and that's a spurious, you know, reality. But finally, what I don't think we can ignore is that in many organisations we have to recognise the accountability systems people work within. You know, people need a business case. There needs to be somebody who owns a programme in some places. So back to your point, if you come in and say, well, this is all complex and chaotic, that doesn't play out in the system. So you have to work sometimes initially with the system you're in, and then adapt it as you move forward. So I found it really
and just to build on that, one of the phrases we use in our practice is freedom through structure.
Sorry. Yeah. Dorothy, you had your hand up earlier on.
Yeah, well, it was actually triggered by something Dennis said, because it kind of resonated what you said, and then it didn't resonate at all. Because the thing about, you know, am I lying, or am I faking something that's not there? Just can I give a small example from my work? I'm doing work with the municipality north of Copenhagen. They have problems with some of the areas of the municipalities. They're kind of dead. I mean, people don't invest in the civil society. It's kind of, people live there, but they don't live there, really. It's just a lot of houses, but no life going on. So these 2 guys I'm working with in this municipality, they have the task of bringing this civil society to life. So, when I look at the challenge presented before them, there's the natural complexity of the task at hand, which is really complex in trying to find out who are the potential stakeholders here, who can we mobilize. And then there's all the man-made complexity that has to do with the mayor's mother living in this specific area, and he has a lot of ideas what has to take place in that. 2 of the central members of the team working on this are married, and their relationship is kind of fucking up all the other relationship structures there. There's this one guy who's head of another department that has to cooperate into this, but he doesn't like one of the managers that I'm working with. So there's a lot of man-made complexity coming on top of what is actually the issue here. So I'm thinking, what's my role in this? And I think sometimes my role is to try to contain both kinds of complexity, but then try to work at man-made complexity to give the managers time to work on the real problem. So like going to the head of the administration, who's actually the woman who's paying my bills, saying to her, you need to get your mayor to shut up about his mother and what she's experiencing, because it's blowing everything in this, because they get so I mean, they're just looking at him, so can we make something for his mother? I mean, it's not the issue. Or you need to separate these two people that are married. They can't work together like this anymore.
I completely agree.
Yeah, so exactly. So that's kind of the work that I'm running around doing to help them get an ability to focus on what's really the problem. So I don't think that's lying, but it's maybe containment, I think, or trying to create something of a structure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Rachel, you had your hand up. You did, but you forgot.
That thought inspires me around what we can do in mapping human complexity as well. I'm thinking of things like systemic constellations that are inspired by systemic family therapy, that kind of thing. I think that's an additional, we're talking a lot about mapping, but I think that's really an additional useful form of mapping rather than just the sort of objective, visible, observable mapping.
Yeah, good one. Nadia.
Yeah. Coming from a consulting background, I've seen models like this and we've used it to go to market, and change management is already labeled as the the soft stuff. So it gives the framework. This framework helps to give some structured thinking around it. The challenge that I see in implementation is the picking and choosing. It's not always that easy to pick or choose because there are many interdependencies between one thing and the other. And if you want certain results, then you have to pick two things, or you have to pick three things. And I think the challenge comes in managing your client expectations around that.
Yeah.
I think, but the model is definitely helpful in creating a structured thinking of, to show a way to do managed change.
And one of the things we do, just to build on that, is we map to this model, we map changes that we've done, and we color them like that. And we'll go into a client and say, your change will never look like these, but this is where you see, here we had to do 4 things, because there wasn't enough analysis, but the analysis had already taken place at another, location, so we only, did one thing here. And again, it's a platform for a conversation. And that's, I think, the most important thing that we can do as change managers is to start a conversation that allows a transfer of knowledge and understanding so that our clients see the direction that they can go in,
To what? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, but it kind of relates to the overall conversation and this one. I don't know if you want to say something. So we just wanted to point out that the issue is mine. I'm not accusing anyone here of lying. I'm accusing only myself of sometimes lying. And I'm conscious of the fact that there is a need to contain and to kind of have that tension and a structure, etc., to give a confidence to someone, but at the same time, I'm going like, this is a bit fake, Dennis. Yeah? Are you doing this now tactically, or are you kind of lying? Yeah? So an example of that, in an extreme way, is a conversation that I had last week in a pub, as you do. And this is a big outsourcing program. I won't tell you the company, big outsourcing company in the UK, in the public sector, and they and I'm asking the partner who's overseeing the whole thing, why don't you get people who deliver the big outsourcing contract involved in the business development of it? So there's a business development kind of trajectory. The deal is made, and all of a sudden a whole new team comes in. And you go like, that's not really useful. He says, no, it's not really useful, because it's quite useful to have the same people involved and people complain. My problem is that the people who deliver the stuff, if I get them involved in the business development trajectory, they tell too much the truth. They tell the reality too much to the client and will lose the job. So I like to keep them separate. He had a few beers in his belly, so we probably talked a little bit too much of the truth. So, and that, I can see that. That's more blatant, obvious stuff.
That's the same thing we had in the software industry when the fantastic developers, they were really, really good. But anytime you obviously had to put them occasionally in front of clients to solve problems, but anytime you put them in a sort of any sort of commercial environment, they will be the first to tell you that the software is full of bugs and it's a load of crap. So obviously, you know, when you're going against people like Microsoft and Vaporware, it's kind of not really the way to go. So yeah, I see that.
Can I just, one additional piece of information? How many people in this room have seen a series called Dr. House? Okay, it's a contextual reference, so just for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a series from North America about a doctor who solves amazingly complex medical issues for his patients, and he never speaks to his patient. And when queried, probably once or twice a season, I'm sure, why don't you speak to your patients? He says, they always lie. And I think we're in that position too. We, as change leaders, go into an organization and they say, yes, this is all the information you have to know. It's right here on the table. Take a look at it, turn it around. But how many of them, not through any fault of their own, they're lying because they forget. You get halfway through a project and they say, oh yeah, I forgot. We're having a merger next week. You know, like that's a very stark, you know, example that wouldn't happen, but there's always something that everyone forgets. So it's not that everyone's lying, it's just that they may not understand that it's important to what you're doing then.
They're representing things in their own way, and they're not making the connection between what you need, obviously.
Yeah.
And actually that brings me to another question, because something came up earlier on.
I just want to say that I'm sorry I interjected the word lying. It was, what my experience was not that people actually experience it as lying, but they experience it as making it, as explaining, and they believe when they share this information that they will do it for that price. My observation is that there's just other factors that enter into it, and it doesn't end up being the price or the time. But they believe it when they say it.
Elizabeth.
Well, the word lying is a difficult word, and I think we all go along probably with what Lisa is saying about the complexity and absence of information. But I am very struck and very grateful actually to Dennis for saying what he said, because if Dennis is saying something that I'm sitting there wondering if what I'm doing is fake, what Dennis is expressing is something, I think, which is important to him, and I guess we've all come across. Not thinking, am I lying? We can probably all put that in a box and think, I know when I'm lying and when I'm not lying. But there's all this grey area, and the ethical problems alongside the problems of deciding which model you use and what you say at one time are not simple ones, I don't think.
No, and on that score also is to what degree, bearing all that in mind, should we keep leaders in their comfort zone or not? Because we talked about, you know, make them feel comfortable, give them something where they're not challenged, or you know, or should we be?
Burning platform is at the beginning of the model. I didn't take it away. If the organization needs to be uncomfortable, then you have that as a tool. You have many tools to use based on your analysis of the situation. I'm not taking anything away. And I agree with Steve that there are some organizations that you need the conflict, you need the chaos. Rick and I were working with an organization 3 days ago, and they are in just the worst situation. We can't take them out of that situation. They're there, and they have to sit in it. What we can do is understand that that's where they are, and we can help them see that that's where they are, and we can guide them towards coming up with a solution that will get them out of that terrible place they are now. You can't magically take a model and change what's going on in an organization. It's impossible. But what you can do with the model is say, okay, we're going to sit here for a minute, because here's where you are on this scale or that scale, and the model frees you to use whatever tool you want to deal with the emergent issue or the now, you know? Sorry, I feel soapboxy now.
Yes, Mason.
Yeah, it's interesting that now you really have a model which is sort of a one-size-fits-all, and then you tailor it.
Yes.
You cut it to the size that's necessary, which from a commercial point of view is pretty ingenious. I don't have that. I don't even have a toolbox I walk around with. So and perhaps financially I'm in a situation where I don't need to desperately go out and advertise to find clients. I work through word of mouth. So recently I've been doing some coaching work for Pictet with the middle managers who need to face new responsibilities and targets, and they're feeling uncomfortable, and that works. And the fellow at Pictet, because Pictet has many, many clients, referred me to a medium-sized financial house. They thought they had a problem, and then they worked well with Pictet, so when he said, you should meet Mason Deshocha, what does he do? Well, talk to him. And I just came in, and they said, are you good at team building? I said, of course we can do that. Well, let's sit down and do that. I said, well, and how would you do that? I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Tell me who you're working with, and I'll call them. I'll talk to them if you give me this permission to do that. And I'll come back in a week's time. We'll sit down and I'll talk to you. And then we'll frame your problem and see what your problem is. And then what I would do is tailor, relative to that problem, what it is I think I can help you with. And even then, we have to, the solution I don't know yet, because we're going to discover together. And he was sort of taken aback. I was then able to come back, because he allowed me the access and the freedom to do that, to realize that talking to people, that basically what they had was they were growing too fast. They were growing too fast and they couldn't gel. And I sort of came back and said, well, you don't have a team at all. You have a group of people, of individuals. They're highly successful. They're not working together. You don't have a team. What you probably need is a mission statement, because you don't have a culture. So we need to work on how it is that we're going to develop a team. Who are the senior managers? Do they work together? Do you talk to each other, and so on? And see if we can work out. If you can tell me, working out what your culture is, and then we might progress towards a mission statement. But you really need one, and so on. So that worked. But I realized that my lacune, what's missing is, of course, I don't have a banner. I don't have a way of selling myself. So far it's been working because I haven't had to, but if I had to, it'd be a problem. So I was intrigued by your model and somewhat skeptical, and now when I listen to it, you are playing with it, and in a way you're playing. To me, it's not programmatic, but programmatic can work. Emerging can work. You give me a problem, I can deal with it. It's quite brilliant, but is it deceptive? From a sort of academic point of view, if we're trying to understand it, it could be deceptive. But I also find it ingenious, so that's my comment.
Yes, Dorothy.
Well, building on that, I think, and your question, do we need to take leaders out of their comfort zone? Yes, but not too far out. Because I think going back to neuroscience, and you probably discussed some of this yesterday. I mean, if people are really insecure and anxious, I mean, you don't get people developing in an atmosphere like that. I mean, you don't get them to use the creative parts of their brains. I mean, they'll get stuck in fight-flight responses. So I think it's really important to say that we're not just doing this to please the client or to get the job, but we need to be able to have meaningful conversations, but also create kind of lacunas of reflection and relative stability within the cares that they are navigating if they want to find new grounds and new ways of working.
Monica.
I think it is important to take them out of their comfort zone, and if they are leaders and running a company, they should be used to it and they should know how to deal with it. But the thing is, we then have to bring them back, and that's the task. But they need to be out of the comfort zone, because otherwise they won't change.
Yes, Eamon.
So just to add an Eastern dimension to this, I spent a lot of my life in change in Asia Pacific, and what you can, there's been some fairly strong words articulated this morning about deception and lying. I think what people forget is that there are different cultures. So you're faced with a Confucian culture in the East, where people actually feel that if it's not important to you, you don't need to know about it. So they're very economical with the truth, and I think that works in a bi-directional midway between the change agent and the target audience. And you need to learn to have to drill below that to actually bring that up. And that's just part of the culture.
And in Japan, there's no concept of truth.
In a sense, yeah.
I spent 4 years there. And
Yeah.
Said what worked in the moment. Facts were good, but truth, no meaning.
Well, there is no truth. Anywhere.
It's relative in a sense.
There's your truth, your truth, your truth, your truth, my truth. There's no the truth. All right, anyone else got any game-changing, life-changing, world-changing oh, Mark has. Of course he has.
Just come back to Dennis and to try and reassure him that I don't think, although he may be using that word fake, it's not fake if you're just saying this model is a way of thinking about things. You're not saying this model is reality. You're saying this model is a metaphor and it's maybe a useful way to structure our thoughts and our conversations. That's all. There's nothing fake about that. It's very, very constructive and helpful. So you're not
Which will not work in all situations, but in many more than we think. That's
But that's what he can be saying to himself. He doesn't have to say that to the client.
Yeah.
He's offering structure to the client because that's what they need. But he's just not presenting to the client saying, this is how it is, this is the truth. He's just saying, this is how we can think about this. That's all.
This gives us a frame.
Should we play with some string?
We could. Yeah, we need about 15 minutes, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, who wants to play a game? We have to
Yeah!
Yes!
They're about as enthusiastic as a turtle in the Pacific Ocean, aren't they? No, we're playing a game. I decide executive decision.
So the object of the game is to suspend a marshmallow. Your materials are 20 pieces of pasta. Please count them before
And don't
you
break
start
them.
using them. If they break, you don't get new ones. One piece of string that is exactly the same length as all the other string, and one piece of tape that is exactly the same length as all the tape. So you all have the same materials. And you get one marshmallow.
Model will help.
Later, there's a whole batch.
It's a nice tattoo.
Okay, so the object of the game is using these materials and only these materials, suspend the marshmallow so that it is freestanding. Okay, so you can do anything you want, build a structure that will hold the marshmallow with everything but air with air all around it except where it connects to your structure. Does that make sense?
So it's hanging on a string, is that it?
It can hang on a string, it can be on top of the spaghetti, but it has to be a freestanding structure.
Oh, you can't hold it. It has to be.
You can't hold it. It has to be a freestanding structure, and the team that wins is the team whose marshmallow is the highest. So you have to build a structure.
So the structure has to be on the table.
The structure has to be on the table, yes. You can do it on the floor, we're gonna measure it, so do it on the table so it's there. Okay, and before you get started, take a look around the room, because you don't have to stay at your table. Now you've got some options. You might think, this is a team activity, who do I want on my team? You might think, if we only have 15 minutes to build this tower, can we afford to have 6 or 7 people on the team, or should we have a team of 3? You might say, I wonder if I would be better placed to do something a little differently. And I'm not going to tell you what that is. What I will tell you is the marshmallow has to be off the table. It must be freestanding, and you must be on a team. So you can't do it by yourself. Okay?
And only use those materials.
And you can only use those materials: tape, pasta, string, and a marshmallow. Okay? And you have Yeah, start it on the table because it'll be easier, trust me, it's a lot easier if you start on the table. Take 1 meter of string, you know, but this was freestanding. No, you can't chop up the marshmallow, it has to be a full marshmallow. You wouldn't do spaghetti anyway.
Oh, you're eating it.
Yeah, they cut it in half. Well done.
We will win.
Come on, you're not gonna do it, you're too late, you're too slow.
Winning team, everybody look, who won?
We did.
Highest?
No, but they were latest, they were too late.
Okay.
Who else is competitive?
Your
So you could, the idea behind serious games is you use them for a purpose. So you're having fun, but you're also learning something. In this particular case, you can talk about teams, how teams organize, how you do planning. You can also talk about communication. It's a fantastic game. It's called the Tower Game, and you can use anything. Straws, coffee sticks. When Lars and I were getting the supplies yesterday, I was actually at a Marine base in Kazakhstan, and one of the managers came up to me and said, "We heard about your games. Can you play a tower game with us?" And I was like, "Okay, we are in the middle of nowhere. We have no material." So I went to the hotel where people were staying, and I asked them to save the water bottles. They had the 1.5 liter water bottles for about 3 days. And they built towers out of water bottles, which was fantastic because there was a lot of engineers and they went really high. Now, and creativity and innovation. You can give awards for the prettiest, you can give awards for the most creative. There's all kinds of things you can do. Guess who builds the best towers? What group, what community?
5-year-olds.
Which one?
Preschool. Preschool, well, kindergartens and 1 to 3s, I think. So, and why? Because they are not limited by the barriers and filters and restrictions that we as adults put on ourselves. Okay? Good job.
Excellent. Okay, folks, lunchtime.